police have been set up exacerbates and plays on racial inequality in America. And because of that, people are protesting, and some of those protests take the form of riots. So I think it's I'm not sure if it's the best to say protest or riots as much as it's to say, just civil unrest in general.
Yeah, I think that's like a very fair point to make, because it's not necessarily just two sides to an issue, right? Like there's many different ways and it's kind of integrated all in the same. But along those lines, do you think that, just from a historical perspective, a lot of people like to cite historical figures, like putting words into like MLK's mouth, Malcolm X's mouth, just famous Black activists. Do you think that in terms of how we represent, do you think we're misrepresenting those people's messages by sort of picking and choosing quotes where we see fit and kind of misrepresenting history from, the more Eurocentric view that we kind of learn in history classes? Or does anybody have any thoughts about that?
I'll let someone else go first.
Feel free. There's no like right or wrong answer, everybody. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. Where, the schooling system in general whitewashes a lot of our history. Like when we get taught about MLK, we get taught about how he was like super peaceful and how he led marches and stuff. They don't teach us about how the march that he led were attacked with dogs. People died during these marches, and how this was a fight that lasted so much longer and with so much dedication than we took the time to actually appreciate. They also, ignore his later works and his later sayings that are now finally getting some light. Like towards the end of his life, he would speak on the fact that, first of all, I'm sure we've all heard this, but riots are the language of the people. And that's not to say that he was like, he was a rioter. He was like, burn this whole thing to the ground. But he was still understanding of the analysis that it's more about the cause and the goal rather than the form that the civil unrest takes place in. And further than that, MLK, I believe this was also towards his death, he said, "I'm afraid that I've integrated my people into a burning building." He was cognizant of the fact that the fight was changing. So sure, he made a clear dichotomy between getting rights for African Americans in the sense of equality under the explicit law, in the sense that we were allowed to drink at the same water fountains, things of that nature. He made a dichotomy between that and the economic freedom that was going to be the next fight. He understood that the fight was changing and that it was going to be much harder to get white America as a whole to give up some of their economic superiority as opposed to just, the social superiority. And because of that, I think, because of the fact that that's not taught in schools, a lot of people come away with this misunderstanding that, the civil rights movement was completely peaceful and all people did was like ask really nicely and then they gave them rights. And I mean, it would be great if it was like that, but that's not how anything works. And people's analysis tends to be lacking because of the fact that the school system didn't teach us, the breadth of knowledge that we should be taking away from the civil rights movement and movements in the past like it.
Yeah, for
Now,
sure.
when we're talking about this dichotomy between protests and riots, or the lack thereof, how do we feel about the way that the media is portraying them as separating or combining these two instances and ostracizing one from the other, making one seem bad and one seem good? How do you guys think that affects the ways in which the movement its effectiveness?
Okay, so I just want to bring something up. I honestly, I disagree with what the media portrays riots as. They're glorifying it, or at least in my opinion. And a lot of the stores that are or a lot of the businesses that have been destroyed in the process, that have been caught in the crossfire, are Black owned. And I feel these ruining these businesses, especially in times like now where the economy is already hurt, is hurting more than it is helping. So I just wanted to point that out.
If I could respond really quickly, that's a really good point, because when things like this happen, there's a lot of people that get caught in the crossfire. So I understand how that can be very frustrating, can seem counterintuitive from the perspective of someone outside of the system. And, it's going to be painful for people that get affected as well. But again, where I think that analysis is lacking is within the realm of the greater picture. When we look at the civil rights movement, there were riots on riots on riots. Like people were rioting in the streets frequently. After MLK died, there were 6 days of riots, and it wasn't until then that the Civil Rights Bill of 1968 was actually passed. I believe it was 1968. I'll have to double check that. But you have to understand that, like, when you create a situation in your society in which riots are going to occur, that is not the fault of the people. That is the fault of the system. And when riots occur, it's sad. No one likes a riot. But when you have a bunch of people that are literally fighting for their lives, not everyone's going to be extremely peaceful. It'd be great if no small businesses got affected, and it'd be great if we could, economically redistribute perfectly in terms of our direct action against the system. But that's simply untenable. So I think it's kind of irresponsible for us to be focusing on, dang it, these mom and pop shops are getting destroyed. Because what does that messaging really do? Are we speaking directly to the protesters? Are we telling them to stop destroying mom and pop shops? Or are we kind of just signaling that the entire movement can be criminalized by creating this dichotomy and by illegitimizing the protests that are occurring in more violent fashion?
Okay, so just to respond, like personally, I don't think that the protesters and like the riots, like they're not like interchangeable. They're two separate things, like at least in my opinion. So when I hate when the media like combines them and just kind of like throws them out together as if they're like interchangeable. And so I'm okay with the protesters. Like I love seeing other people like fighting for what they believe is right. But at the same time, like you have to like when you brought up the civil rights movement, there were completely different circumstances. Like right now, unemployment is like at its peak, and like to make things like, okay, so how am I supposed to describe this? So it's like, while I like 100% agree with you, there's like, you have to kind of like look at like the economics and like what's going to happen to like the black owned businesses and like the people who are, yeah, like the black owned businesses, like they're also like facing oppression. So why would we make their lives worse? So yeah, I just wanted to like bring that up. Sorry.
I think that goes back. Let me just like you can go ahead, right? I think it also goes back to the idea of like difference between like looters as well, where you have that aspect, and we're gonna touch on that. So yeah, I just wanted to bring that in as well, because there's like this third party aspect that we might want to consider. But yeah, go ahead. Sorry for whoever I cut off.
I was just wanted to respond to what Sam was saying, and I honestly do empathize with the small businesses, and I am in no way condoning violence, but I also think that there comes a point where people have to recognize what occurred in order that is leading to that. Because if you look out through all of American history and throughout the historical timeline, whether it's from 1619 when the first slave ship was there, or even when it was through the progressive presidents like FDR and Teddy Roosevelt, their programs and all of the reform that was placed in his American history did not benefit African Americans. In no way, shape, or form did it really have a large effect on the stance of African Americans. And although there were some events such as Reconstruction and civil rights, if it was really effective, we would not be where we are today. And in regards to what we were talking about earlier about MLK, I think a lot of people, including the media, like to focus on, like to do anything truly to kind of undermine this protest. And I think a lot of people who would not really talk about or support MLK in the past bring him up now to kind of say, oh, well, he was peaceful then, but people forget that he was assassinated and he was very disliked in his time. And if the protests that were there, also to what someone else was saying, they did get violent because of the police officers, but also if that was truly effective, it would not be where we are today. And I think what bothers me is, although I do feel for the small businesses, larger companies like Target, they denied protesters materials and first aid and remedies for tear gas. And that's not really justifiable to me. You know, Target is a multi-billionaire company. I think Target is going to be just fine. I think those bigger companies, I think Rolex, I don't necessarily agree with it. And I agree with Sam about the small businesses. I do think it's wrong. But as for those larger companies, they can pay for the fixes. They're going to be just fine. But I wonder, how much money does it really take to bring back George Floyd? Is there really any price you can put on a person's life, no matter like their skin color or their age or what they go through? There really is nothing that economics could play in this that could somehow change my mind on how human rights can be viewed. And I notice a lot of people are very silent about the deaths, but they seem very vocal about the violence. And that's something that personally bothers me. And it bothers me so much. And I don't think it's really something, I think what really bothers me is that there's a discussion on this. As much as I respect talking about things and educating other people, I think it's important, but also a part of me kind of questions the morality that there has to be a discussion on whether these protests are morally correct or not. And there's not too much of a discussion on whether the systematic oppression that African Americans have faced throughout all of history is up for question. No one likes to bring up the fact that when we were recovering from the Great Depression, that African Americans were left out of that. And from that point in history, that they remain socioeconomically down, that there's redlining that keeps African Americans away from more like upheld and supported communities. Literally yesterday, I was at this protest that's right here. It's like 5 minutes from my house. It's a park. And the woman that, called for it, she said, we wanted to take 5-10 minutes to just have the African voices here come up and speak. There was 3 African Americans in that crowd. And the reason for that is not because they're not fighting. Obviously, you can see in the pictures they are fighting, but it's because in these neighborhoods, some people do what they can to oppress African Americans in this area because of redlining and because of past socioeconomic circumstances. And I don't know, it's really unfortunate that businesses are getting hurt, but also there's a lot of people that are against the Black movement and people that are paid agitators that are going at least to start the riots, to paint this negative narrative and to give people like Donald Trump, not to get too political, but to give them the right to make a tweet about a white protest about masks that can be taken off and saying, these are good people, they're just angry, talk to them. It's very clear that he understands that when there is issues, that if you just speak to people and if you have some sort of connections, that there can be change. But when it comes to the Black movement, he says, oh, these are thugs. He's further implying that these people are dangerous, that these people deserve what's coming to them almost. And he's saying that, I believe it was like, oh, they're disrespecting George Floyd, which bothers me even more because it's almost as though he is taking this person's death as a way to silence the African American community, which is so wrong. He's taking something that is hurting them and using it against them and saying, no, don't do this. He wouldn't want this, but this is exactly what he would have wanted. This is exactly what he needed, or else he wouldn't be, where he is, And then he further on goes on to say, also sorry if I'm taking too much people's time. I'll close it off soon. But then he finishes off by saying, when the looting starts, the shooting starts. And I'm sorry, that you can't say that you are against violence and that you are against violent means to end something, but then also say, I want all of the military, I want all the police officers, I want as many people as possible to imply violence in order to stop these people. But then saying that violence is wrong when they do it back, you really have to understand how far someone has to be pushed in order to act like that. There's no way to justify it, justify that, oh, the violence is wrong, oh, the looting is wrong. Really? But the death of thousands is not wrong? Like, how many names need to become hashtags for people to actually understand that this is something so much deeper than economics? And there's no way that anyone could convince me that, other than the small businesses and people, because you notice a lot of people, they are providing to Black artists, to Black businesses. That's what a lot of social media is helping right now. They're saying, hey guys, you need to give money to these businesses. So yes, some small businesses are gonna get hurt, but I think if at the end of the day, it results in less Black people getting killed for something that they can't control, for something that isn't a crime. I don't know how you can see skincare as, not skincare, I'm so sorry, skin color as something to be afraid of. But if 10 small businesses, 20 small businesses, if every small business was hurt, but no other innocent Black person was killed solely because of the way they look or because they seem suspicious, I would much rather that than the economy go down. Like, if the economy could fall, I couldn't care less if everyone was equal.
Yeah, I definitely agree with a lot of the points that you made there. And I think that, I think we kind of touched upon this. If anybody has anything else they kind of want to talk about, like the looters, but I think that, if anybody wants to do it, they can jump right in. Another topic that we had was this idea of ACAB. I'm pretty sure everyone here like knows what that is to a certain extent. It stands for like, I mean, the technical term is like all cops are bastards, but people have like PC'd it like all cops are bad. What do you guys think about sort of this movement and sort of what it symbolizes? And like, do you agree with that message, or there's many different aspects to it, obviously. Yeah.
I think that the acronym is misleading in its name because the what it means is it's against the system of the police, like the police system, because it's built on racism, and the police system is protecting police, and it's not targeting individual cops or their intentions, because I know there's probably a lot of cops that went into the force wanting to protect their city and wanting to protect people, but it's overall that saying that we need a new system and we need something to change because the police force is obviously not working because they're tear gassing citizens and shooting rubber bullets, and they're harming the people they're supposed to be protecting. So ACAB, through my interpretation, is that it's targeting the system and saying we need a change in the police law enforcement and not targeting specific cops. I think but the acronym I think is misleading and a lot of people misinterpret it.
I completely agree with Jean on that because I feel like this acronym brings up a new argument for a lot of older generations and people who aren't like as much into the research of the acronym itself, because it doesn't necessarily mean that individual people are bad, but because people can assume that that's what it means, that creates a whole new argument for people who are generally supporting the Black Lives Movement, like Black Lives Movement matter, but like they don't necessarily agree with their interpretation of this against Black Lives Matter, and it just creates an unnecessary argument about something that we shouldn't be arguing about, which is just basic human rights, to not just be killed for doing nothing.
So it seems like a lot of the things that are happening with the, I guess, acronyms or things that are used to promote this movement. I mean, you look at ACAB right here, we're seeing arguments over whether or not all cops should be classified as bad, and there's misinterpretation of what that acronym actually means. And then you have Black Lives Matter, which was met with opposition saying that all lives matter instead, and misinterpreting the fact that they're saying that the African American movement needs more attention right now. What do you guys think about why they're being misinterpreted, or necessarily if there's any way to solve that in the future?
That's exactly what I wanted to get to. I think we're being a little bit too charitable with our interpretations of how these people are acting. When we say, Black Lives Matter or ACAB or anything of that nature, I mean, I understand how you can look at that and you can see, oh, people might misinterpret it, but I think it's less of a misinterpretation as much as an interpretation that's coming from a lens of trying to criminalize, trying to justify and rationalize any way to move against this movement. When you're already having this sort of psychological allegiance towards the power structure that's in place, you're going to find a way in your mind to create whatever cognitive dissonance necessary in order to justify it. So specifically with the Black Lives Matter movement, like when people started saying that and people responded with all lives matter, this is an elementary school argument. We all understand that if you're saying Black Lives Matter, you're not saying only Black Lives Matter, you're saying Black Lives Matter as well, and we need to focus on Black lives because they're not being appreciated in the same way that other lives are currently. A preschooler could understand this. So when someone responds to that with all lives matter, it's not because they don't understand. I really don't think it's because they don't understand. It's because they have this preconceived notion already in their heads of what the movement is and of how America already functions. They don't understand maybe the history of America truly and in its relationship to Black Americans. And because of that, they purposefully, maybe not consciously, but purposefully, reinterpret in ways that allow them to continue in their cognitive dissonance and feel justified in moving against the movement. Same thing with ACAB, I think. Like, I understand the argument that, not all cops are individually bad people necessarily. But I mean, again, I don't think it's, of course we're criticizing the system, but when we say all cops, and even before, the term got popularized, this has been a thing for a while. When people say all cops, they mean that because of the fact that every individual police officer is choosing to be a police officer. And because they're choosing that, they are choosing to be part of a system that criminalizes and has oppressed minorities, specifically people that are Black, for decades. And that has literally evolved from the slave capturing force. So when you make that choice, you are being a bad person. And that's what the acronym actually means. And I'm hesitant to give such a charitable interpretation to people that are confused by the acronym. They're like, wait, I don't think all cops are bad. I think there are some good cops. Because if they took the time to do the research themselves, if they took their time to understand the system that is in place currently, they would understand that when we say that, we're not saying, individual cops aren't capable of doing good things. A cop has probably been a nice person in some aspects, but definitionally, as a police officer, you are an officer that is part of the policing system. And that is what is bad. And by association, you are being part of that situation, which makes you bad as well.
I think to add on to that, like when I'm talking to people and they're like, you can't say all cops are bastards or bad, because like I know cops are really good. They protected me, whatnot. The idea of classifying all cops as being bad comes with the responsibility that position holds. Like, for example, like if one pilot, was drunk and crashed an entire plane, like everyone would be like, extremely mad at that one particular pilot, because of the fact that that power that comes with being a pilot comes with responsibility, of taking care of all your passengers. So I think the same responsibility if is even like more amplified being a cop in America, because you have the ability to protect people, but insofar as that you are state-sponsored violence to a certain capacity, you also have the ability to kill people. So saying that all cops are bad is just saying that is the gravity of the position that Black people are in America and the amount of power that position has. So it's important to say that like all cops in America, if are not fulfilling their duty or are endorsing like a systemically and structurally racist system, yes, they are bad. That's not to say that there's not good cops or that cops can do good things. It's just saying all cops are bad. The system itself is structurally unjust. And I think if people worry too much about like the verbiage, then they're worrying less about the issue. That's another way for people to just dismiss the issue or come up with false perspectives. So yeah, that's just my thoughts on that.
And I think another thing, going off of that example of a pilot crashing a plane because they're drunk, I think the difference between that scenario and the scenario that we have right now with the police is that if that pilot did crash a plane and was drunk, they would be instantly crucified, they would lose their job, they wouldn't be able to continue the same thing because the system that they're a part of doesn't accept those sort of mistakes. It doesn't accept that sort of lack of regulation. And the phrase all cops are bad comes to the sense that the system actually protects them when they make gruesome mistakes. And that's why participating in that sort of a system is something that's at this point looked down upon because of the way that it treats not only minorities and African Americans, but the way that it prioritizes its own members over the people they're supposed to protect.
Yeah, I like going off of Christian's point, like I 100% agree. There was a point in time where I wasn't like with the ACAB movement. Like I wasn't like I condoned it. But after like doing research and stuff, I realized that ACAB, like the acronym and like it's part of the movement, brings to light the idea that good cops allow for bad cops to be bad cops. So one example of this would be, there's a video surfacing the internet right now, and it's this video of an old man who had a permit to protest on city property, and yet the National Guard and SWAT teams and like the federal government and police were all on that property. They were basically trying to get the protesters to stop protesting. So when this old man came and like tried to talk to a police officer, the officer didn't respond. He didn't like say his badge number or anything. He pushed the old man and he fell and hurt it and like hit his head. So he was bleeding through his ears. He was seizing, and there was a cop who tried to help, but the same cop who pushed him stopped him from helping. So we can all agree that the cop that tried to help was a good person. He tried to help, but he went along with what the bad cop was doing. He didn't step out of line. So when we say ACAB, all cops are bastards, it comes from the term bastardize, which means corrupt or debates. So as I said before, it just brings to light that good cops allow for bad cops to be bad cops. So that, I guess that kind of indirectly makes them bad cops. So I just wanted to bring that up.
And while we're on the topic of that specific example, I want to add that the police force that was involved in that incident released a statement saying that a protester got injured when he tripped and fell. So anyone who's watched the video, he didn't trip and fall. He was pushed to the ground, hit his head on concrete, and started bleeding out of his ears. The video is extremely graphic, and you can see all of that occurring in real time. But just saying it again, the police department released a statement saying that a protester was harmed when he tripped and fell. So now imagine we didn't have video of the incident. Now, you don't have to imagine it, because there are hundreds of incidents like these where we don't have video because someone just didn't happen to be recording. And police departments all over the country will say whatever they need to get out of trouble. It's literally that simple. This should be a harrowing example for everyone to see, wow, they don't really care. They'll straight up just lie. It doesn't even have to be a good lie. They'll literally say something happened that didn't happen. And if we don't have proof of the system failing us, then they won't admit to it. And that goes even further to prove the acronym, that if you see the video, there are multiple cops there, and all of them, they see him bleeding out of his ear, and then they realize, oh, we're not allowed to help. They look back and they keep marching as this guy's literally bleeding out of his ear and seizing. So, I do think these police officers have souls, and they could be like great people outside of their operation within the police force. But, the system creates this. There's a term called the blue wall of silence, which is essentially an idea that if you're a cop, you don't snitch. You never snitch. You just don't do it. I mean, we've all experienced this in school to a certain extent. Like, we've all seen someone cheating, and we're like, it's just not worth the energy. I'm not going to be a snitch. Like, this occurs. And that's like fine in the sense that it's not our job to police our fellow students to that extent. But when it comes to a system in which you're operating in where it's life and death, we cannot afford for there to be, an honor code. And besides that, I want to get into one more thing: police unions. Police unions are some of the strongest unions in the country, because obviously not a bunch of other unions aren't allowed to exist. That's another point in its entirety. But police unions are very strong, and police unions are essentially, when you enter a police force, anything that happens to you is taken care of by the police union. They argue for better wages, they argue for better time off, hazard pay, things of that nature. So they're good in that extent, but the problem is that they also protect officers that do harm. And if you, in reference to this blue wall of silence idea that I was talking about earlier, say you're a good cop, you're a good person, and you see something happening and you want to snitch. What is every other cop in the department going to think of you from now on? Oh, I don't want to be partnered with this guy. I'm not going to work with him. The police union is going to disown you. You're not going to have any overtime pay, any benefits, etc. The entire system is built in such a way that if you're a good person and you join the system, either you have to ignore the fact that you're a good person and start being bad and allow those things to happen, or you have to quit. There's just those two options. So you have to look at it from, and those are just the perspectives that we've seen. There's a million other examples of things like this happening in which it shows that if you are a good person, you cannot be a cop because the system immediately crushes whatever sense of justice that you have.
It kind of makes it so that like if you want to be a cop, you're not going to be able to do good in that position just given the power structure around you. And I think that idea of system goes into some of the other topics we have going on, not just in the policing system, but one thing I wanted to touch on before that is the sort of shift in social media use we see, especially among our generation. You know, you see the Blackout Tuesday, you see all these hashtags being used, you see people reposting constantly. And I just wanted to get what you guys think about that. You know, there's the idea of performative activism. I think Wismik, I know you talked about that in your Instagram TV, but I just wanted to get whether or not how we kind of distinguish from performative activism and actually use social media as a platform for change.
Yeah, so I think this movement is so much different than past ones just because how accessible media is and how everyone has a phone now. Everyone can take a video of something if they see injustice being done. And then also, besides a lot of things like, for example, TikTok's really big now. And a lot of videos are being posted of just people at protests being beaten up or have tear gas thrown at them. And also there's a lot of people, activists on that platform, bringing up a lot of good points. And I think that definitely a lot of those creators have shaped and impacted a lot of users of TikTok and their views because they just bring new perspectives in that I feel like you normally wouldn't get. Because I can talk to my friends in Irvine and they usually have pretty similar viewpoints as me because they've lived here. But someone across the country could be going through something completely different and share certain viewpoints that have different perspectives. And I just really think that it's so impactful because you get all this access to all this media and all of these new ideas and new platforms. But then there's also, as you said, performative activism, which is, for example, Blackout Tuesday. I believe the original intent of Blackout Tuesday was for you to turn off social media, not post anything that was supposed to be like, oh, going to the beach with my friends. Like it was supposed to be a complete like quiet of like media and you're not supposed to post anything. And you were supposed to reflect on what the movement meant to you and why you wanted to advocate for this movement. But then it was turned into, oh, I post this black square and I put a hashtag and now people think I'm a good person because I'm being like, I guess, like in a way morally correct. And people see that I'm advocating for other people as opposed to let me reflect on this and educate myself on this topic. And I feel like it was in a way very twisted, even though social media is so big right now and it can really be used for a good thing, like putting out petitions and protests and stuff. I think it's like, I don't know, that's it.
Yeah, and I would just kind of like to add to what Jean was saying. I definitely believe that social media is an incredibly powerful platform, and in many ways it has supported this movement. One of them being it has exposed the reprehensible behaviors of many of the cops, such as what we were talking about earlier, the video of the old man falling down, like stuff like that. When you record it, you need a platform where you can share that to other people, where that can be seen by other people to help, you know, drive conversation and drive change, because it shows people the reality of how things are. Because I do believe that it's kind of hard, you know, it's really difficult to see exactly everything that's going on, especially if you're someone that may not use social media. But so just like what Jean was saying, I think that it does bring light to a lot of conversations. And I know that it's very helpful in spreading movies, books, businesses. But also there's an extent to where it's solely to, you know, post things that make you look good and post things that genuinely help people, such as the Blackout Tuesday. A lot of people hadn't posted anything, hadn't talked about it. People that may even use the N-word or not support this movement outside of the you know, George Floyd situation and what recently has struck up this conversation. And they kind of post it and then they go on with their like FaceTime with friends or watching TV. And I think what Blackout Tuesday was really supposed to be was a day for you to step back from your privilege that you may or may not have, and kind of take a deeper look at looking at how can you help people that have been silenced for so long, and taking that time to, read books like The Hate You Give, watch movies like The 13th, like buy from Black businesses. It's all about supporting people and bringing up people. And that's what they mean when they say, like, use your privilege. They don't mean speak for Black people, speak or be in front of Black people. It's more to give a platform to these people. And I do think social media does an incredible job of that. But I also think that the people that are posting it to look pretentious and to look as though they care deeper than they truly do, it's wrong. And it's not something that will raise your social cue solely to pretend to be supportive. You have to truly care, and you have to truly put your time into a movement that has been suppressed for so long.
And I think that another thing about social media that you sort of brought up, and Jean brought this up as well, is this idea that it's incredibly quick. Social media nowadays is this scaled down version, or at least for the sake of this movement, it's become a scaled down version of the news, of editorials, of opinion articles. Everything has been condensed into really at max for the majority of these clips. They're 1 minute, and you're looking at isolated incidents, and it runs the risk of people either misinterpreting an entire movement, misinterpreting an entire event off of that 1 minute clip or less. And it also runs the risk of glorifying things. And like we've been talking about how it leads to more performative activism, where people do it solely for the sake of clout, right? They do it solely for the sake of appearance and making it seem that they are doing the right thing. I think the biggest example of this wasn't just the idea that Blackout Tuesday ended up being the perfect example of performative activism with Black screens everywhere, but the fact that we had to tell people to not use the Black Lives Matter hashtag, that people were so caught up in the movement of posting a Black screen to make it seem that they were supporting them, that their lack of true support and understanding of the movement didn't lead them to consider the fact that they were blocking out information, that they were blocking out leaders in this area, that they were blocking out the true people who needed to be heard for the sake of them just trying to put up appearances.
And I want to add something here, because the people that are posting the Black square, they're not like bad people. They just they feel this emotional connection to it. They realize, wow, I might have not known as much as I should have. And because they have not taken the time yet to reflect on actually how to aid the movement and how to really help our communities move forward, they jump on the first thing that they see. I know a lot of people that like truly really do care, that posted the Black square with the hashtag, but it's because we don't encourage enough critical thinking about these types of things. We don't encourage in-depth analysis. We encourage people to get those sound bites, which I think is what Krishna was jumping on. Because of how quick it is, people sometimes they don't go deep enough into it to truly understand. So when you see like, oh, post a Black square to support the movement, well, I support the movement, I'm going to post a Black square. Instead of thinking about, okay, so who does this really help? Am I really showing my support in a way that matters, or am I doing it in a way that only helps me? And because of that lack of analysis, I think that's where we get these types of performative activists. And again, I just want to make sure, like, they're not bad people. They just need to do more work, actual hard work, which I think is what genuinely we need to be focusing on as a community, is educating people. Because once we get the education through, these types of things will happen less often, hopefully. Because then once people are educated on the topic, they'll think more deeply about how they really need to be inciting change and the real hard work that has to be done, as opposed to just posting a hashtag or tagging 10 friends in an Instagram challenge.
Yeah, I definitely think that we shouldn't judge people for how much they decide to post or what they decide to post, because I think we should focus more on educating them and having an open conversation and going in without accusing them, or like just because someone chooses not to post doesn't mean they don't care, or just because they post a black square and nothing else, no petitions, no links to anything. It's not that they don't care, but they haven't educated themselves, and they're not necessarily choosing to be ignorant, but you can be that person that's like, hey, here's an article I found that I think you should read to just get more educated, because going in with an open mind and listening to what they have to say and help educate them is one of the most important things we can do, definitely as a generation. Whether that be like peers our age or older people like our parents or our family or relatives, just educating everyone, I think definitely broadens the perspective and will help push the movement further.
I want to be clear though, I'm not absolving people that engage in performative activism of their guilt. I mean, they still made a mistake and they still need to do better. I'm just trying to focus on, instead of, you know, the guilt tripping part, going straight to the do better part, you know, because it is an issue if you are just posting the black square, but, you know, I don't really care about being upset at you. I want you to just go straight to the part where you're, instead of posting the black square, you're organizing within your community, or you're having that hard conversation with your parents about their ignorance, or your friends, or anything of that nature.
So I definitely think that, like, for people who might not know a lot about this issue, like posting that black square, like as Wismic said, like it kind of gets like the conversation started, which is what I think a lot of us need, you know? I don't think I haven't posted the black square. If you've seen my stories, I haven't really posted too much. And the reason for that is just because I haven't, you know, necessarily felt the need to like keep on pushing that out. But what I do think is that, like, by having things like this, you know, having roundtable discussions like this, that's where we really have the opportunity to grow and learn, really learn. I think because, in my opinion, talking to people is a more effective way than learning than just reading articles as well. So I think that, you know, we should focus more on people trying to educate them, providing resources, providing like article links, providing movies to watch. I know The 13th is a great movie. When They See Us are also great documentaries. And I think that we should focus a lot more on that so we can move together as a community. And this issue, the prison industrial complex, is a very system-oriented issue. It's not necessarily just about policing. And for those of you that don't know what the prison industrial complex, essentially what it is, it's when the government and sort of how we treat our justice system, when their interests overlap. So if you see over here, it's kind of got cut out, but like you sentence more people to prison, then you build more prisons, and then they have lobbyist groups which pressure politicians to pass more laws that are supposedly tough on crime. So, you know, when you hear people like Nixon, when you hear people like Trump saying, you know, we're the law and order candidate, and many times that means just posting more restrictive laws that essentially lead to the era of mass incarceration we see now. So I think the question that we're trying to get out of this is, how do you break this system? How do you stop overlapping private interests and profit off people trying to get rehabilitated and people who are essentially getting their lives thrown away because of this system?
That is a very tough question. And it's super multifaceted because, well, first of all, I want to continue to illustrate the problem. So, you know, America's population is somewhere around like 300 to 400 million people out of like 7 billion people on Earth, right? But America has 25%, I believe, of the prison population. We have more prisoners per capita than any country on Earth, and we're beating them by a lot. We're number one by a huge amount. And not only that, but we have a huge recidivism rate. And recidivism is how likely after you leave prison are you to go right back. That's because, again, we don't focus on rehabilitation. What happens is, you know, you go to prison and you miss out on key points in your life that are, you know, checkpoints to getting on the right path. And we don't focus on education in prison. All we do is we keep them in there, and we, you know, in a lot of ways, we keep them as slave labor in a lot of ways. And then once they're out, they really don't have any skills to do anything. So they're usually homeless, and we criminalize homeless people. So you being homeless is essentially a crime. You go straight back, and the cycle repeats itself. So first of all, I think the first step, probably, in my opinion, probably be definitely get rid of private prisons. So, I mean, private prisons aren't a huge portion of prisons in America, but they're still enough to where we need to be getting rid of them immediately. I don't know how anyone thought that having a company run a prison was a good idea. When you when you have I mean, like, a company's job is to maximize profits. And when you tie profits to putting people in jail, you're going to incentivize people to get more people in jail by any means necessary. So first of all, completely abolish private prisons. It's beyond stupid. But going further than that, we have to realize why people are being imprisoned in the first place. And a lot of that tends to be, first of all, drug offenses. So people will have a gram of marijuana on them and immediately go to jail because of mandatory minimum sentencing, which is essentially saying that no matter what, if you were violent or non-violent, if you have a drug crime charge, then you are mandatorily have a certain prison sentence that is of a minimum amount. So you can't like have less than 15 years, even if it was like a gram of weed that you had on you. And so in particular minority communities that are over-policed already, you're having people, honestly, kids, 16-year-olds being tried as adults for having a gram of weed on them and then being sent to prison. So we have to be reforming, first of all, our policing system and our laws and how we criminalize certain things, specifically drug charges, as well as, providing resources so that people can go get into a part of their life where they don't commit crime. We have this individualistic nature in our society in America where we think of everything as an individual occurrence. Like, this person committed a crime because they are a bad person. This person committed a crime because, they were violent. But that's not how things work in reality. When you come at it from a systemic perspective, from a holistic perspective, we see that, what are the communities that commit the most crime? They're the poorest communities because they don't have the resources. They don't have a pathway to college. They don't have a pathway to a better life. So they have a lot of times no other choice but to turn to crime. And, it's just not like, just to illustrate it further, if you're well fed, you don't need to steal food. But if you're starving, you do. So let's think about how that affects certain communities and certain demographics. But, the way we get all these things done, again, just to circle it back to the main point, is I think through education. Because a lot of people don't understand that we have private prisons. Because it seems crazy, right? Like, how do we have private prisons? A lot of people don't even understand that we have those. A lot of people don't understand the fact that we criminalize drug offenses so heavily. A lot of people don't understand that, marijuana is federally on the same scale as heroin and other way more intense drugs. They're all considered Schedule I drugs federally. And that decriminalization and legalization needs to occur expeditiously.
I'd also like to add on that it's not really based on the people. It's kind of the society that makes it through an injustice system. Because, again, I'd like to clarify that I support Black lives, but then we need to open our perspectives that more whites have been killed by the police. And you might think that probably white people have a larger population, but it says that by statistics, it shows that Blacks have more crime rates. So it's not necessarily about the people. It's kind of the system that makes it turns it into like an injustice towards Blacks. And I support the Black Lives Movement, but we need to remember that that white lives have also been lost. And so how can we explain this towards our society? And how does our justice system analyze these flaws?
That's a really good point that you make here. So when we talk about the Black Lives Matter movement, we speak in terms of the fact that, Black lives are generally devalued. But you're right, there's a lot of police violence towards all groups of people, which is why I think no matter what group you belong to, we need to be coming together in this, because police violence is rampant throughout all communities. It happens to affect Black communities more and disproportionately so because of the fact that they are victims of over-policing, as well as lack of education funding and things of that nature. In general, just plain old stereotyping and racism that occurs in and of itself as well. But, we need to be, and I don't necessarily know if this is a specific time, but, as we move forward to reforming the police system, or, you know, in my opinion, we should be completely restructuring the police system. As we move in that direction, we need to be also considering the fact that this is an issue that goes beyond just one system or one group of people. And we need to be coming together as a community from all walks of life to try to get this thing solved.
Yeah, I think that like statistics can also be misleading in a sense because they fail to take in multiple factors. You know, on like, I don't know if black and white is necessarily the correct terminology to use. Like on paper, some of these statistics may look like, oh, these people commit more crimes, but then you also have to look like what causes these people to commit more crimes. In my opinion, I think that from slavery to Jim Crow to mass incarceration, Black people and people of color have been historically marginalized and put in a place where, you know, that's the only option they have, and many times is to commit crime, to sell drugs or do something of that sort. A lot of these low-level minor crimes that get them put in prison, and that kind of perpetuates the cycle. You know, we have this next thing about the poverty cycle, where, you know, a child grows up in poverty. They don't have access to education because our policymakers and people in authority don't think that we should provide decent paying jobs, provide access to education. Therefore, they perpetuate that cycle, and communities of color, which have already been historically marginalized, continue, and there's not really any way for them to break out. So I think this kind of goes back to our previous discussion, but from a policy standpoint, from, you know, what we can do, how can we break this poverty cycle? How can we empower people, you know, sort of to break out of this cycle and come to a point where, like, policing doesn't have any effect on necessarily whether or not these people are incarcerated, from a macro standpoint, as well as a micro standpoint, if you want to tackle that as well.
I mean, I think that a lot of things that have to do with the poverty cycle, it's because it's a cycle, there are a lot of different areas you can tackle it from, right? You can start from sort of the youngest age, and you look towards education, and you see that in communities of color, you see that for the vast majority, education is severely underfunded. And the fact of the matter is that in America, wealth disparity is structured in the way that people of color are placed at the bottom bracket for the vast majority. And because of that, we have underfunded schools, and that leads to, I mean, it's no coincidence that the high rates of crime are tied with low income, that high rates of crime are tied with bad education systems. And so from that standpoint, it's this idea that you can work from the ground up and start at education, or you can go to the middle and you can fix people's opportunity. You can have businesses. There was a business, I forget where it was, but this man who came, it's this idea that hiring people based off of their actual merit, off of their actual worth, and using that and creating more businesses where people have the opportunity to get jobs. And especially when we're talking about the cycle of poverty and the cycle of mass incarceration, it's this idea of hiring ex-convicts. The fact of the matter that we've consistently been talking about is that convictions aren't necessarily based off of violence, off of a person being inherently bad. A lot of the times they are just mistakes, if we're talking about these mandatory minimums for drug sentences. And this whole idea of opportunity comes at different levels, and that's probably the key to breaking this cycle of poverty.
Yeah, Krishna, like I agree with you on there, but I feel like one of the first steps to breaking this cycle of poverty is for those who aren't a part of the cycle to recognize their privilege and use that privilege to help those who are actually a part of the poverty cycle. And for example, there are, I'm gonna guess, around like 15 different organizations that help adopt a child, which basically means that you can fund for this child's like education and their food, their like shelter, everything like that. Those who like aren't as privileged as like you or me, those who are, like don't have as much opportunity. And I feel like in order to break this cycle of poverty, you have to like give more opportunities to those who don't have them right now. For example, in Irvine, in IUSD, like our district, we have hundreds and thousands, like not hundreds, but we have a lot of different courses that we can take, courses that we want to take, classes that we can take to help us and to help educate our like us. But when you compare it to like cities or like counties that don't have as much money or like aren't as like or aren't as doing as well as like as us, like on a socioeconomic level, you have to like realize and recognize that like we have 10 times as much opportunity as like those who don't. And many of those communities are people of color, minority communities. And we in Irvine are the exception to that. I feel like for us, a lot of our community is our minority, our minorities are made up of minorities. And yeah, so we are the exception to, or like we're that like 1% that group of people who we're all minorities. We all are educated and we have opportunity. And I feel like, and as I said before, recognizing that we have more opportunity, recognizing that we have the privilege is one of the first steps to like break this poverty cycle.
Yeah,
Oh, sorry.
No, sorry.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm very nervous right now, so I might not be very good at expressing myself, but I grew up in poverty. When I was a high school sophomore, my mom worked multiple jobs, and in a year she would make $14,000. And the other half of her income was $14,000 of welfare. And to me, the solution to poverty is, access to community programs and investment into community programs. And to me, growing up in this situation, what I hoped for the most was an education, access to education. And something that I just looked up right now is on eldbill.org. Non-white school districts get 23 billion less than white districts, despite serving the same number of students. So there are definitely huge disparities in education. Something that I also want to point out is that poverty is traumatizing to live under. People want to say that, poor people, they're so happy or whatever. Like, I'm not very good at expressing myself, but poverty is a traumatizing situation. As I was living through this, I was scared that I was going to be homeless. When you live under poverty, you're not really thinking about, what's being taught in school. You're not really thinking about, am I going to study for this test? What you're thinking about is, am I going to survive? Am I going to eat tomorrow? Am I going to live in my house tomorrow? So, people who grew up in poverty, they're not dumb. They're not given the opportunity to learn. They're not given the opportunity for their minds to develop. Something else is, I want to be a psychologist, and something that I've studied is how poverty impacts brain structure. Children who lived through poverty, their limbic systems and their prefrontal cortex are undeveloped. And so the limbic system includes the amygdala and the hippocampus. These are the parts of your brains that control emotion and memory. So basically what that's saying is children who grew up under poverty, they experience more emotional dysregulation. They may not have the same ability to develop memories, because when you go through traumatic situations, you can't remember that disrupts the system, that disrupts the memory system. Okay, as I said, I'm sorry, I'm not expressing myself very well. And the prefrontal cortex, that's the part of your brain that involves planning, decision making, things like that. So executive function. So what I'm saying is poverty literally causes brain damage. And you're not going to do as well in school your brain is literally impaired. And this is due to a combination of many factors. Lack of nutrition, the fact that poverty is a stressful situation, the fact that you may be growing up in a neighborhood where there's constant violence, the fact that your parents, you might be in an abusive situation, and things like that. So, I'm sorry for cussing. I'm sorry, what else can I say? Yeah, like, also, poverty increases instances of mental illness. People who live under poverty are 2 times as likely to experience a mental illness. So, yeah, people who grew up in poverty, they're not inherently aggressive, they aren't inherently dumb. It's because of the circumstances that they survived. And we need more community programs. We need more opportunities for kids in poverty to be at an equal playing field as kids who do not grow up in poverty. And, as many people said, a disproportionate amount of people of color live in poverty. So, yeah, I'm sorry if I did not express myself very well, but yeah, that's what I have to say.
Yeah.
First of all, you express yourself like very well. I think you explained a lot of things that needed to be explained. And I want to transition from what you were saying into from the impacts and then go to a legislative standpoint. So what you're talking about with the lack of food security, precisely. If you have a lack of food security, first of all, you're worrying about that. That's an immense mental strain. And then second of all, a lack of food security is a lack of nutrients that goes to certain brain pathways. So that's going to affect your mental development in that way. So the way that we legislatively fix that are programs like SNAP, which is that we need more funding towards those programs and increase their ability to function so that we can get communities that don't have the same resources, the same access to food, more food security, because that directly tracks to progress in life. We've done studies on people that are able to come from communities that don't have food security and then be provided with food security, and they do immensely better than those who do not have that type of community intervention. And further, and this is why this is a complicated issue, because there are so many layers and layers and layers on how poverty is a cycle that compounds. So also, and we know this based on psychological research, if you have your parents at home during your developmental years, so I think 4 through 7, if your parents are home a lot of the time and they're interacting with you and they're asking you questions, then you're going to develop a much, much healthier brain. So now imagine if your parents are working 3 jobs to try to provide for you, and then when they get home, they're so tired from working 3 jobs that they have to either sleep, rest, and still have to worry about feeding you. So those types of parents who are working so hard to provide for their children are not going to have as much time to engage with their child and foster healthy developmental time periods, which leads to things like deregulated emotions and leads to things like attention deficits and leads to things like general inability to focus in school. So there are layers to the privileges that we have, and the most important thing that we can do is not just recognizing those privileges, but then working legislatively and within our communities to try to work against those so that we put people that don't have the same resources on us at a more equal playing field.
Yeah, and I think that's something that I wanted to touch on as well, that idea of a legislative solution. Going off what you were talking about SNAP, that's an example of a welfare program. But I think as a whole, the entire welfare system has a problem. The welfare system in and of itself is its own cycle. And for the vast majority, at least statistically speaking, it serves as a trap. And this is because for those who use the welfare system, you get a certain amount of benefits with it. You get a certain amount of income that is non-taxable. You get actual welfare benefits that a certain income bracket qualifies for. But the biggest problem with the current welfare system is that as soon as a person passes that threshold for that, to qualify for welfare programs, there isn't any gradual siphoning off of welfare. It's an immediate cutoff, and for at least the majority of the programs and the big programs. And so what ends up happening is that once a person passes that threshold and goes out of that bracket, they lose their benefits, they're taxed, and you end up getting shot right back down into this cycle of welfare. So legislatively speaking, in addition to SNAP, which is that vital food program that helps in a number of ways for people, these gradually moving away from welfare systems for people coming out of poverty, for people who are able to use the welfare systems in a positive way, putting in legislation that allows them to slowly wean off of it is probably one of the biggest things that also needs to be.
Yeah, and I just kind of wanted to add to that, Anna or Anna, I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce your name, but I just want to say that you are heard, and I'm so sorry you had to go through that. That sounds like really traumatic and really hard. And I know that in the position that I am in, I may not be exactly able to fully relate to, but I just want to let you know that you're being heard. And what you're saying is really important. And I do believe that this cycle, it's really damaging to people. And I think the best thing that people of a more privileged status can do is to educate other people, because I feel like when people hear those stories and they hear about those experiences, they are more motivated, because it's easy to get caught up in superficial issues and things like it just some of a more privileged stance might be upset that, oh, maybe I can't buy this new shoes or this new clothes or something like that. Things that, although I'm not invalidating those feelings of people, I'm saying that it's really nice to get perspective. And I think once people receive that perspective, they will want to do what they can to redistribute money so that it goes to those neighborhoods that are not as privileged. And I also think that it's so important that as people of that status grow up, that there are things like affirmative action, so that when it comes to the college process, that people who may not have been given that same help earlier on, because some people really like to invalidate affirmative action. They like to say, oh, well, why do they deserve this just because of this? But I think what people don't truly understand is that underneath it all, the same person that could pay for ACT classes or that could pay for a tutor could, because they maybe don't need to work a job for their family, had more leisure time to study for things, weren't so stressed about eating the next day, or rather stressed about getting an A on their test. They don't understand that there is not equality in that position, that some people are more stressed about surviving than they are about studying. And so that's why when it comes to that level of education, it's so important that there is more support for things such as affirmative action, or more support for things such as, like you said, like community help, and just helping people, giving wellness activities to people, giving people the option to be heard, the option to relax and maybe realize that they're not alone in this battle. I think that's something that's also really important. As important as it is to also emphasize the political side of it and the legislation of it, I think it's also really important to emphasize the mental health of it, and just being there for people of those conditions, because it just being there for someone and hearing someone and being able to maybe spread or listen or even communicate their story to other people goes a long way.
Yeah, I definitely think that you can go ahead. Sorry, I didn't want to cut you off.
Okay, so I just wanted to touch on what Nadia said about perspective. So my parents actually, there was a point in time where they were below, they were in poverty. They had to use food stamps and welfare programs, and I'm lucky enough to say that I never had to deal with that. Being my parents, they got out of that hole through welfare programs, community programs, and just local programs, like I said before. And so hearing what my parents had to go through and their perspective about what was happening at the time only made me care about the issue more. So every year for my birthday, for Christmas, I would collect money instead of actual presents to donate to food banks and different charities and stuff like that. And every other week before Corona started, I would go to volunteer at the OC Food Bank. So I feel like a lot of people don't know about the poverty cycle. They think that people are born into poverty, you can work and get out of it. That's not how it works. People in poverty aren't given as many opportunities as those who are upper middle class or middle class in general. And so having to educate people is definitely my like a number one priority, especially when you're considering the poverty cycle or like issues similar to this one. So hearing other people's perspectives should shed light on the issue, but a lot of people don't. There aren't opportunities for people to share their perspective, and opportunities is what they need. They need the opportunity to share. They need the opportunity to be heard. And so not a lot of people know that my parents actually had to like live off food stamps. They ate one meal a day, and that's absolutely like baffling to me that like they couldn't go into their fridge and just like take when they were hungry and just like eat a snack or just something like that, because of how bad their situation was. And hearing that my dad is still affected by this, like he's a workaholic now. He doesn't talk to me anymore because he's so afraid that he won't be able to like afford like the opportunities that I want to like take part in. So sorry, my voice is kind of like shaky, but like Nadia said, educating people and sharing the perspective of those who are more privileged than others is probably like one of the biggest and best ways to prevent this cycle from like continuing in the future. So I just wanted to bring that up.
Okay, I'm sorry, I kind of want to respond to what some of you said. So on the topic of things like SNAP and things like welfare programs, something that I want to point out is that a lot of people who need these programs the most may not trust the government. A lot of these people might be immigrants, they might be undocumented, they might, just for numerous reasons which I think are valid, they may not trust these programs, including my parents. My parents are immigrants. My mom is an immigrant. She can't really speak English. She is very, very scared to use these programs. They exist. She's just scared that something negative may happen if she uses them. So she doesn't, even though we need them. And also on the topic of mental health, as I said, poverty is traumatic. Poverty is a major reason why people have mental illness. As I said, if you grew up in poverty, you're 2 times as likely to have a mental illness. And I have a disability protected by the Americans with Disability Act. So I think absolutely the discussion of poverty is inseparable with the discussion of mental health. I'm sorry, what else did you guys talk about? Yeah, I'm sorry, I forgot. You can continue.
Sorry, I just want to like touch on the topic of disability. So I feel like mental and physical disabilities are kind of similar to the poverty cycle in the sense that there aren't as many opportunities for people with disabilities to like get jobs, to like have a living wage. So for example, there are some like office jobs that one of their requirements would be like you have to lift 20 pounds, or like you have to be able to lift 20 pounds. And I'm like, this is an office job. Like in what situation would you have to lift 20 pounds? So just in like those small like descriptions or like requirements that like they're kind of like discriminating in the sense that like people who are just as qualified yet still like but like mentally but like still can't like physically do as much work as like the next person, I don't know, there's just like always like that sense of like they won't be able to have as like many opportunities as like a full functioning like working person. So one example of this would be like autism. So I have a family member who has autism, and I know, considering like he's my brother, he's like 9 years old, so I know in the future it's going to be very, very hard for him to like find a job to like get an education. And because because of who he is as a person. He's definitely like not, he's hard to talk to, so he won't be able to like communicate as well with others, but he is smart. Like he has the mental capability of like he has like the same mental capability as like others who aren't on the spectrum. And so knowing that he won't have as many opportunities kind of hurts me. It just like bothers me. And so I feel like it's kind of similar to the poverty cycle in the sense that like he will struggle to get a job, and I know that. And I know that that I have to be there for him like almost his entire life, but unless something changes. And I realize that's like not what we're supposed to be talking about, but I just want to like shed light on the idea that there's like still discriminatory like cycles besides poverty. Like there are people who lack opportunity who aren't part of the poverty cycle, yet still suffer the same consequences that this cycle brings.
I want to connect disability to police brutality. It's often not talked about, but ableism is a part of police brutality. Right now, I'm on NBC News, probably not the best source, but it says half of people killed by police have a disability, either mental or physical disability. And a major reason for this is because if you have a disability, you literally can't comply. I've literally seen, like, I don't know if you're like me, but the past few days, I've been on Twitter just 24/7 scrolling because, I'm so stressed out this situation. But I've seen videos of a cop stopping a man and like telling him to do something, like get down. And this man is saying, I'm paralyzed. But the cop does not care. And that goes for mental disabilities as well. If you have a mental disability, your ability to communicate is impaired. Your ability to regulate your emotions is impaired. You might be extremely just terrified in a situation with a cop. Your ability to hear and follow instructions is impaired. And as a result of that, you are going to be unable to comply, which can be deadly. And something else is, a lot of people call the police when there's someone, quote unquote, acting erratically. A lot of times this is a person going through like a mental health crisis or something like that, and people are not able to recognize the signs of a mental health crisis, so they just label this person as dangerous. And when you are a person of color and mentally disabled at the same time, these are two ticks against you. These are two reasons why people might assume that you are dangerous when you're really not.
Yeah, I think that, it's ironic how a lot of people say, America's a land of opportunity, but that only specifies to a select group of people. Like, I mean, my parents immigrated, I'm lucky enough to have this, but I think that time and time again, we see, whether it be mental health, whether it be people of color, America and its systems have just marginalized those people to a point where they can't recover. And I think that there's so many aspects. It's not just justice. Like, it's not just about Black Lives Matters and all the, what this original discussion was about. It's about the state of America, which is why we decided to name it around that, because there's so many issues that are all interconnected with one each other. And even if you just get rid of one of them, if you tackle one issue, it's not going to bring the whole system crashing, which is why we have to educate ourselves about every single part. We have to learn about every single part. Thank you guys for sharing your experiences, because, I had no clue about a lot of these things, like especially the mental health aspect that you brought up. So I just wanted to thank you guys. And I think there's one part that probably hits a little closer to home with the IUSD high school students racism controversy. So, I mean, we blurred out their names. I'm pretty sure all of you know who those are, and they're specifically from Woodbridge High School. But what do you do about people like these who are privileged, but they still feel the need, or in the past have felt the need to do things like this, which are obviously racially insensitive? So how do we go about, they're part of our generation, they're going to be the next future. How do we go about solving this issue as well?
You can go first. I'll follow.
Okay. So To be honest, I feel like a lot of people have like talked about this in the past, and I feel like this is like correct, like at least in my opinion. So racism is learned. You're not born racist. You're not born hating other people. Hatred isn't something that like that comes naturally. It has to be taught. And I feel like as well as you can like learn something, you can also unlearn it, for lack of a better term. So while that is kind of like complicated, while it is a little bit harder to like unlearn racism, it's fairly easy to educate people on why something is wrong. For example, one of my close friends used a racial slur like on a group chat, and nobody really said anything except for me. And what ended up happening was I got kicked out of the group chat because they called me super sensitive. Oh, you're like a snowflake. But like in reality, I'm just pointing out the flaws in like what that person said. So I feel like there's this really big stigma around like snowflakes, around people being like too sensitive, and that shouldn't really be a thing in my opinion, because there's no way you can be like oversensitive on a topic that is sensitive, and like when people make jokes about it, when people like think it's funny, it just dehumanizes the entire movement. And I feel like that's a really big issue, or at least in my opinion it is.
I think you made a really good point there, and I want to echo some of your sentiments, specifically the fact that unlearning needs to be our priority. And a couple things. So I'm sure all of us have friends who have some less than savory views, I'll put it that way. And it's hard, right? It's hard to be the one person that's like, hey, this is bad, because you don't want to be the one friend that's like being annoying. You want to be the one friend that gets, upset at everything and have that label attached to you. But that being said, you kind of have to, because a lot of, at least from the psychological perspective, a lot of why this happens is because it's learned. It's learned that it's okay, and it's learned that this is acceptable behavior. And because there might be a million people that disagree with it, but if none of them say anything, then it becomes okay. It becomes perceived as the dominant ideology, a dominant perspective. And that being the case, other people might assume that perspective. Humans are very, very social creatures. So if it is seen by a group, by the entire group as inappropriate, then people are more likely to believe that it's inappropriate as well. So you have to start with your friend. And this is why I say so much, have these conversations with your friends. If you really care, if you really want to help, talk to your friends, because your friends are the people that are going to be in power soon. Your friends and these communities are going to be the next generation that's going to be running things sooner or later. So what you need to be doing is right now, before they go to college and become a doctor and then not listen to their Black patients, before they go to college and become a computer scientist that is then discriminatory in the workplace, before they grow up and become a politician that is ignorant to the plight of poverty, talk to them right now. Talk to them right now and speak to them about the reality of the situation and try to educate them. And I'm telling you right now, it's not going to be easy. They'll probably call you a snowflake and ignore you. But guess what? The next person who does that, the next person who talks to them, is going to have a slightly easier time, because you're going to be in the back of their head. You're like, wow, I think I've heard some of this before. Maybe this is right. And it's going to be a slow process, but just because it's slow doesn't mean we don't start. And honestly, because it's so slow, that means we have to start right now, having as many conversations as we can, so we create a force that's pushing towards at least being more cognizant of all of these intersections that we talked about, whether it's poverty, mental health, race, socioeconomic status, whatever. We have to start pushing towards that place.
Now, I see that we've been talking a lot about the way to get around this problem as being education and being conversing with other people and talking to them about it. But there's something going on right now, and very specific to this controversy, this IOSD one. There's a petition that has been started by a student, and the title of the petition is Punish Woodbridge High / Irvine students that posted racist content online. And it has 760 people who have signed. Since Wismic started talking, it went up by 30. So it's growing, and I've gone through the comments on this. It's on change.org, and they are comments that you would expect, right? They're hurt, they're angry, they're demanding change, but this petition is demanding punishment. And so how do we feel about this shift? Is it going too far to this idea that we now start ostracizing another group of people and creating another problem, or is that something that we should be doing?
Yeah, definitely. I feel like there's two sides to it. You know, there's the social side to it that a lot of people have talked about, as far as like, you know, if there's racist views in someone's mind, right, they're not going to unlearn themselves. So we have to take the initiative personally with each of our friends, to encourage them to change their perspective. But I think that there's also the disciplinary side, you know, because realistically a school is also accountable to some degree to its community. You know, if the community is like deeply unsatisfied with something students have been doing, then I think that, you know, the school has to take some kind of action. But yeah, you're definitely right that there's like a fine line between disciplinary action that's like reasonable and would actually contribute to changing people's outlook on things, and then just like straight up vindictive punishment. And I think that we have to tread that line really carefully, because again, yeah, you're definitely right that we could end up ostracizing people who otherwise could change their outlook on things if we approach the situation differently. And, you know, as far as like the net, you know, benefit for everyone goes, it might be better to approach it more constructively. I'm not sure, and definitely not sure what the solution would be. Like, I'm not sure how to train someone to change their views, but I'm not sure that just jumping straight to expelling a student, I'm not sure what the petition calls for, but, you know, I think we have to have a serious discussion about what the proper disciplinary response is. And I don't think that's happening right now.
Sorry. Do you want to go first?
Sure. So I feel like one issue that I feel like that this kind of highlights is when people say like hurtful or like harmful things and claim it's like freedom of speech. Well, yes, you have like a constitutional right to like speak your mind. You don't have the freedom of consequence after you say this. So I feel like kind of going back to like the prison ideal, I feel like rehabilitation is like a lot better than imprisonment. And you can kind of like on a much like smaller scale, you can bring this into like IUSD in and of itself. Like, I don't like, you could definitely like teach these people what what is right and wrong, rather than just punishing them because they feel like their freedom of speech has been like infringed upon, when in reality, no, it's not. You're free from, you're allowed to speak your mind. You're just not, you don't have the freedom of consequence. So yeah, I just wanted to like bring that up. Like their excuse for that First Amendment right doesn't really have the freedom of consequence.
And then also I'd like to add on that consequences or punishment is not really the answer towards resolving racism. It just brings in violence, and it makes these people of both sides more hyper, like partisan towards their side. And for example, even I was born and raised in another country where racism really took place, and like people of different races weren't treated equally. So when I moved to the United States, and Irvine is a very diverse area, especially IUSD, I was able to open up my mentality and see that everyone's equal. And it took time. And I think that if I was like punished as this petition states, I think I wouldn't have been able to realize this as quickly. And I will be honest, it was difficult, but it is possible, especially when you're young and you have this mentality that you might be, like you have this young mind where it can be changed easily. And just while you're friends or in class with different types of people, you begin to realize that everyone is equal.
It's also how accountable is the school for these people's actions, because obviously the one on the right, it's not taken on school campus. So how far can schools go to punish their students? Are schools responsible for their students' actions off campus and for what they post on social media? I know some schools have, or some schools or just like organizations on campus have put what are they called? The things you have to sign. What are they called?
Waivers.
Contract?
Like
Conditions?
yeah, but you know what I'm saying, right? What are they
Yeah.
called? The
Are you talking about the ASB thing?
no,
Like
just like in general that you have to sign that's
Contract.
contract. There we go. You have to sign like a contract that says I won't like anything or post anything that's like offensive or nudity or just anything in general. But if a school doesn't make you sign that, how far can the school go to be liable for your actions? Therefore, being able to punish you. Like I don't know if the one on the bottom left is taken on school campus or not, but it's kind of like how far is the school liable for your action?
Actually, cases like this have been used in the Supreme Court, where people have been commenting on, like, on other people's posts off school campus, and because the school doesn't really sign on, like you said, doesn't create a contract towards this, it's not really based on what they write, or it's not really based on like who writes this or where they write it. It's based on what they write, and it's their option. They can't be given the consequences since they're technically not on the school campus, but it is a topic that has been debated over the years that has even led to the Supreme Court.
So to address a couple things. So this conversation has been happening for a while in certain communities, specifically in like the critical and race theory community. The phrase that people use is restorative justice versus retribution, right? So restorative justice would be the idea that, you know, we're not trying to punish, we're trying to make them do better. And retribution would be like, I need punishment for these actions. And, you know, generally, I and most people that are engaging with that type of theory decide that, you know, restorative justice is the way to go. But I think there's a fine line that we have to walk here between, you know, trying to create a better environment and then also denying voices of people that are affected. So it's I gotta say, it's gonna be easier coming from the perspective of someone that hasn't experienced direct racism and things of that nature to say, let's teach them when you're not the one that's being affected by it. And I agree that generally there is space that we need to hold for teaching people and informing them about their actions. But I also don't think they should be completely free of consequences in at least, you know, at least in a sense that still allows them to learn. So I do think that, you know, there is room for consequences here as well as teaching. I don't think those things have to be separate. As long as we give consequences in a way that allow people to stay safe and feel like their voices are being heard, people of color feel like their voices are being heard, then we can also educate and try to change their minds and discuss these things. And I want to touch on what someone said earlier. I'm sorry, I don't know your name, but you know, these people are young. So a lot of where their minds are where their parents' minds are or where they come from. So a lot of hateful behavior is simply just from the fact that they don't know any better. And it's not an excuse because, you know, Google is free, educate yourself. But also we have to be understanding of that perspective. And that's why I say it's so important to have, you know, conversations with your friends. Again, hitting on that point, because you can be the one to educate them. Not that it's your job, but, you know, if you want to, you can be the one to educate them and put them on a path towards better ideas. Because these two people in these photos, and there's other examples from across, you know, Orange County, but I bet they have friends that could have helped them earlier. And not to say that this is on them, but I think that there is a conversation to be had around how much responsibility do we have to our communities to be constantly trying to push for better ideas within our entire student body.
Yeah, and I think, oh, did I cut off someone? No, okay. I think that, like, in terms of whether or not like the actual schools should take action, I think that they're going to be ostracized enough to a certain extent because everyone knows their names, and I think that that feeling just alone, like knowing that it's out there, in terms of just these specific students, I think that we should take more of the opportunity to educate those people who may share like some of the same beliefs, or like not the beliefs but like share the same racist ideals, or it's called passive racism, as these people probably exhibit. And I mean, you can go back to, I forget, is it Newport Harbor where they had like the Nazi symbols out of the red cups? I think that the school did expel them, or suspend them. I think it's one of those two, even though it was off school property. But I definitely agree with the idea of restorative justice in the sense that we should be trying to teach people rather than constantly punish them, because that's not solving the system. Once you see people around you, like your friends who may have before like just been neutral around this issue, once you see them starting to get more vocal about this, then you yourself feel pressured by other people to not conform to those beliefs as well. So I think it's a responsibility from all of us, as Wismik said, as many people have reiterated, to take that opportunity right now to educate and to talk with our friends and have hard discussions. I think that we talked a lot about potential solutions. If you guys have anything, just pop right in. But one thing I wanted to share, just in case we don't have time, we compiled this list. Hopefully you can see this, of resources that you can also share to your friends as well. So there's petitions here, both individual and overall causes, places to donate, and we split it up by bail funds, policy reform, political organizations, all of that, and local Black-owned businesses as well. If you want to check it out, that's the link over there. But I think that now's the time to educate. Now's the time for us to all learn, watch a documentary, talk to your friends. If anybody has any closing things they would like to mention, now's the time.
Yeah, just I mean, it's definitely true that there's a practical limitation where like the schools don't have jurisdiction, like outside of campus, and I think there's also like realistically, like I'm not going to name names, but even more than multiple of my friends have used racial slurs in the past, and it's definitely a thing. I've had to just have discussions about it with them, but I think that you have to be careful about the degree of action that you take, again, because like as Wismik said, with the restorative versus the retributive justice, you have to be careful and consider whether you're doing more harm than good, because if you're just taking action for the sake of punishment versus taking action for the sake of changing someone's outlook on something and changing their behavior, to a point where it's more, where it's like morally acceptable, you have to do things that ensure the most productive outcome. So I think that is, like, as far as solutions go, I think you were definitely right that the social pressure alone will definitely force those individuals in question, who from Woodbridge, to issue apologies and be more cautious about what they say. But it's not entirely clear that that will teach them the right lesson. They might just be no longer using racial slurs in public out of fear, but they might still hold the same views. And in fact, it might polarize them further, and they might think, oh, we live in like a politically correct, hypersensitive world, and they'll develop their own, conspiracies or whatever. So I think that the real solution has to be, education. And that's why all these petitions going around about encouraging more accurate history education and things like that are invaluable, because we need people to have the base knowledge to understand that these things are wrong, so they don't do them in the first place. Because trying to punish them or patch up the issue afterwards is just, it's not going to be as good a solution as solving it before it happens, by teaching people the right lessons early on.
And sorry, real quick, I want to just address this. This is specifically important in Irvine because a lot of us, we come from a community of immigrants. So we're not going to be as, educated in terms of having a baseline historical understanding of oppression that's happened in the United States in general. So having an education system that really does serve its people and is truthful and honest and blunt about the past of America, I think is a huge step in the right direction towards educating people in a way that allows them to really understand and be aware of where the history of these racial slurs come from, and where the history of the Black plight in America and everything of that nature originates.
Yeah, on the topic of education, I just want to bring up a really cool solution that my old school actually came up with. So I used to live um in a very like white community, and a lot of people like I was like my family and I were like one of the only minorities in our like community, and my brothers and I went to a private school. So there was this one girl in my brother's class who had a birthday party. You know how like first graders would have like small birthday parties and stuff. So she invited everyone in the classroom because my brother and sorry, because like every white kid in the classroom. And when my brother asked if he like why he didn't get an invite, she openly in front of the teacher, in front of the class, said, "Because you're not peach enough." So when someone said, and obviously when someone says something like that, the teacher would like punish them or like do like have some sort of consequence. But um when she contacted the parents said, "Sorry, we don't allow those type of people in our household." And I was like honestly baffled by like their answer and like the fact that they allow their children to act this way, the fact that they act that way. So what ended up happening was the school had a mandatory core or like a mandatory like and like course where the parents had to be in attendance and the student had to be in attendance to this course. And it was if you didn't attend, you would end up getting expelled. So basically, it was about the consequences of what you say and the consequences of racism. And the fact that they forced the parents to be there as well just shows that like rehabilitation is 10 times better than consequence. So if the student was expelled, her parents would have taught her almost the exact same thing and she would do it at the next school. So when you bring education into the solution, it only makes it better. Like educating people on the consequences of what they say and the consequences of like what they act and like their actions just result in a better person. And like bringing awareness to those types of solutions would definitely be better than just expelling the student for not without reason, but without proper explanation.
I do want to clarify one more time though that we have to hold space for the emotional trauma of people that are affected by these types of things, because educating is great, but it's slow. And I think we have to have a conversation within ourselves about how much is fair to force someone to have to go through, right? So like if you're experiencing that type of discrimination and you feel like, you can only educate people as far as they're willing to take it. And in your specific story, the little girl probably took some lesson from it, right? It's a start, but it's not the end. And we have to, first of all, continue and make sure that we're not just having one conversation, but we're having multiple and frequently, but also hold space for the anger and emotions of people that are affected by it. So if, I'm gonna be blunt here, if someone that is affected by it asks for expulsion, you don't have to support it, but I don't feel like it's fair for you to say, well, I mean, I get that you're angry, but actually we should be teaching them, because you can do both. And in a lot of ways, I do think it's fair for people that are affected directly by these things to be upset and want that type of retribution. So just hold space for both of those and have the conversation on an individual basis. So we're not just completely ignoring the feelings of people that are affected by these things. And we're also not, not having solutions that move us forward.
I'd also like to go back to the poverty cycle and what Arush said on how the US causes this poverty cycle. I'd like to add on that like the US actually makes it quite easy to get out of the poverty cycle. For most people who grew up in poverty are now multi-million or billionaires. I know it doesn't really necessarily go towards all people, but then again, even though people in poverty are more likely to receive mental illnesses, I think it's just I don't think it's just based on how much money they have to spend, but on the mentality that their parents raised them. The same thing as with racism. I think it's just based on their background or their family preferences. Like, for example, I've had a friend who was in poverty and she usually didn't have a lunch. I had to pay for her lunch sometimes just so she can have a meal. And it's but then again, she was one of the top students in my middle school. So it doesn't necessarily mean that just because you're in poverty, you won't have educational skills. I think it's just that when you're in poverty, it actually motivates you more and more into, growing your educational skills and so forth. And then going back to George Floyd, he wasn't there isn't really much evidence that necessarily says that he was in poverty. I think he was just trying to create a shortcut towards this corrupt system. And then returning to his death, I agree that it was brutal and it wasn't necessary at all. He was supposed to be given justice. And no matter how much justice is given right now, it's already too late since he had already passed away. But then looking back at his records, it states that he has had 5 court cases. One of his last one was where he had held a gun towards the stomach of a pregnant woman, and others towards where he had stolen items or drug abuse related.
Okay, I'm gonna have to interrupt you here. I'm really gonna have to interrupt you here. I'm sorry, because this type of framing is incredibly irresponsible. I apologize, but this type of framing where we're talking about a person who died and was murdered at the hands of police, and we're using their past to in any way type of justify what occurred to him, is incredibly irresponsible. It doesn't matter. He could have been a mass murderer. The police officer didn't know that when he killed him. All the police officer did was act inappropriately at the time. So that's the only thing we should be addressing when talking about this. There is no reason to be bringing up any sort of past history or anything of that nature.
Oh no, I completely agree. No, that was completely brutal and unnecessary.
So why bring it up?
No, I was bringing up the fact that because he was in that it wasn't necessarily because he was held up, not just because he was an innocent man just walking by who stole a check. He held him.
Wait, first of all, he didn't steal a check. First of all, he used a $20 bill that was accused of being counterfeit, and it wasn't counterfeit. That's what occurred. Second of all, we live in a country where we have the assumption of innocence until proven guilty. All that occurred, one more time, all that occurred was the police officer acted inappropriately. There is, again, zero reason to be bringing up anything that happened in his past. First of all of your claims were unsubstantiated. I've done ample research on the instance. And besides that, this country has a history of creating narratives around people to justify racial violence. It happened with Tamir Rice, Botham Jean, and as far back as Emmett Till. It's not appropriate, one more time, it's not appropriate to be speaking on his past. All we focus on is the police interaction that he occurred.
I agree. I'm not supporting the police's side in this situation. I'm supporting George Floyd's, but I read a lot. I've read a lot of articles that state that he was just stopped out of no reason whatsoever, when there was a reason, since he has because of his past. It wasn't just he wasn't stopped just because of his skin color. He was stopped because of his past.
He wasn't stopped at all. What occurred was the police were called on him because he was accused of using a counterfeit $20 bill. So I don't know where you're getting your information, but it's incorrect. And I would urge you to look at resources that have more reputable claims.
I have, and I see your point. But then again, I'd like to clarify, I'm not supporting the police's side in this situation. That was completely unnecessary, and his death wasn't
but you are
necessary.
I'm sorry, but you are. When you do things that reframe the situation on anything else other than his murder, then you are supporting the police's side by recontextualizing about an issue that does not exist. His past, first of all, again, your claims were unsubstantiated about him holding a pregnant woman at gunpoint. I've not heard anything about that. But the thing is, even if that were true, it does not justify anything. So there is zero reason to bring it up.
I brought it up because I've read a lot of articles that state that he was just stopped because of his skin color. He was held down because of his skin color.
So what are you implying he was stopped for?
No, he was stopped for the like $20 bill. No, that's why he was stopped. But I'm saying that they held him because of his past.
And they
How
weren't
do you
aware
know
of his,
that?
they weren't aware of, like, even if there was a criminal record, they wouldn't be aware of it. Like,
They
it was
didn't
just,
know his past before they stopped him or put his knee on his neck. They didn't know any of that.
And even if they did know his past, I think that the idea, like America's justice system is not built on the idea of an eye for an eye. Like just because, this is why we have a justice system. This is why police aren't lawyers. It's because they don't have any understanding of the law to a certain extent. And that's why whether or not a man should live or not is not up to the police. I wrote an article about why we shouldn't have capital punishment either. But that still is some legal in some states. That's a whole different issue. But what I'm saying is that that's why there's courts of law, and there's a problem with the courts of law as well. But at least you have the chance in those courts of law for an attorney to, still argue the law. And I think that by what was Nick said, by reframing it out of the past, I think that's what a lot of people do in this situation is they take it not from the overall movement, but to the rioters, they take it to the looters. Just trying to reframe the discussion as well isn't necessarily doing much to focus on the cause. And I know that you're probably not like inherently like, I know you probably do support the idea of like Black Lives Matter, but I'm just saying that you have to be a little careful of when and how you reframe things in context, because it can be taken the wrong way in a lot of situations. And so we're not like attacking you or anything. That's what we're saying. But what I was trying to say, and what I think a lot of people are trying to say, is that we just want you to know that in these types of situations, it's kind of unfair to reframe it by bringing up someone's past.
Yeah, sorry, I feel like this would be a really great time to bring up the Breonna Taylor's incident and like how she died. So for those of you who don't know the story, 3 cops knocked on, really like banging on her door, came to her house with the wrong address, by the way. So
sorry, correction, they didn't knock. They had a no-knock warrant, which means they can just go in without one.
Oh, they did? Oh, sorry, my bad. I did research, but like I didn't know that, sorry. So from my understanding or like what I've read about it, so yeah, they had a warrant to arrest, but it was the wrong address and the wrong person. So her boyfriend, I believe, who like legally obtained a gun, he had it and he was protecting his property, but Breonna Taylor got caught in the crossfire. And so what ended up happening was the boyfriend got arrested for attempted murder. So when you bring up situations like these, and you have to like realize that when cops try to like cover stuff up by saying, oh, this man who in reality was protecting his property like attempted to kill his own girlfriend, so when you bring up situations like these, it just shows that like how cops try to like cover stuff up, and not even like in like a very good way. And while he was released from his while he was released, at the same time, like the cops are still like out there, they're still like serving their country. But it kind of just goes to show that like you can't really, how do I describe this? So you can't really like say that the cops were like they were at fault, but if there's no punishment for what they've done, then there's like, they're not above the law, they enforce it, but they're supposed to, but they don't. And I feel like that should be brought up in a lot of different situations, because almost like all the scenarios where like an innocent life was killed, there were no repercussions, there were no consequences for what people have done, for what the authorities have done, because there's so much protection that there's like almost no way to prosecute them in court, and it's like nearly impossible. So yeah, I just wanted to like bring that up, that like police aren't above the law, they are supposed to be enforcing it, when in reality they're like, most of them aren't.
Yeah, and I think the Breonna Taylor case is a perfect example of the whole doctrine of qualified immunity just spiraling out of control, because we have this concept that you have to be able to prove like a concrete violation of constitutional rights, and there has to be a previous violation that's like exactly of the same nature for you to be able to sue a cop and convict him on charges, which is beyond ridiculous, right? Because if a cop murders someone or unfairly detains someone or assaults someone, even if it's non-lethal, I mean, those are all violations of their rights. But if you can't prove like a prior instance then you can't convict them, even if it's on tape, right? Like we saw this, like even with Eric Garner, right? Like it was on tape, it was recorded. This is why body cams in and of themselves aren't enough to solve the issue of police brutality, right? Because you can have something be on tape and the police, the Justice Department won't do anything about it. And like, that's why I think you made an excellent point with the accountability, because there is no accountability, right? There's no accountability system in place for cops. There's no framework for prosecuting people effectively. And cops are treated as if they're above the law, even though by all reasonable interpretations, they shouldn't be treated that way. And I think that the biggest step, and I think that, the Breonna Taylor case is the perfect example of why we need police reform at the legislative level, not just addressing one case and convicting a few cops, right? Because the George Floyd case was sort of just like the last straw that broke the camel's back, right? Like that wasn't the only reason people are protesting. That was the final straw. That was it, because people had had enough, right? Because countless people had been detained or killed basically with no justification, right? There was no probable cause. There was no threat to the officer's life other than a racial prejudice. And so that was just sort of the last straw, because there's so many cases that are a product of the systemic flaw that's the result of the lack of an accountability system. So I guess the overarching point is that there needs to be an easy way to prosecute cops for things that they've done when there's evidence. Yeah.
I'd like to apologize if I've offended anyone. I didn't mean to offend anyone. Again, I supported George Floyd in this situation. And again, I'd like to apologize. I was just saying that statistic because I've read on a lot of news articles that state that he was stopped just because of his skin color. That's why I was pointing it out.
I have to.
He was killed simply because of his skin color.
And that is what occurred. Like, in terms of his past, I'm again not even sure that any of those claims are substantiated. But if they were, the cops did not know any of those things. The police officers that interacted with him had no clue of his criminal history. They are not aware of his criminal history when they detained him. So in their minds, the only thing they had to be operating off of was, this is a Black person. And when we look at that fact, the fact that all they knew was that it was a Black man who had the police called on him, and then you look at their conduct, the only thing that you can see is, oh, this is what they had in their minds, and this is what happened. All they had was that he was Black and he was murdered. It's that simple of a connection. The reason, and these are one of the hard conversations that I said we had to talk about. I understand you don't mean to offend, and I understand that you're not per se a racist person, but you have to understand that these types of reframings are what people use to then say he deserved it. And I know that's not what you're saying, but that's what a lot of people say when they use that type of rhetoric. And also, there's a history of this. It happened with Botham Jean. It happened with Emmett Till. Like I said, there's hundreds of cases where a Black person is murdered, and they're like, okay, quickly go into his history, find out something that we can use as a character assassination. So I'm just asking you to be a little bit more critical when you see these things that are saying that he was a violent person in his past or anything of that nature. And you can go. I think I'm done.
I didn't know that the police officers didn't know of his history, because I thought that police officers, once they see their ID, they can automatically know their background. I didn't know that they didn't know. That's why I brought it up.
Yeah, so I just want to say something really quick. And this is in no way, I don't mean to be offensive to you or anyone else here, but when the media as well brings up someone's past as a way to justify what the cops did, that's completely dehumanizing them as people. That's just dehumanizing the situation in general. That's saying it's almost an excuse in a sense, because it's you, just because someone did something in the past shouldn't justify what other people have done to them. And sorry, I just want to bring that up. I don't mean to be offensive or anything, but someone's past should in no way be justification for what happens to them now.
Yeah. Two things. I'm sorry if my mic was on while I was talking to someone, but also in a way, bringing up someone's past is, like Sam said, in a way, like kind of justifying the police's action in this case, and just relating to the Black Lives Matter movement versus the All Lives Matter movement. People who support the Black Lives Matter movement aren't trying to like say that all lives don't matter, because of course all lives do matter, but the All Lives Matter movement was created in a way to suppress the Black Lives Matter movement once again, and trying to come up with like a counter argument in a way that's just not, that just is trying to like suppress the Black Lives Matter movement once again. And it's in a way just bringing up someone's past to justify a murder is like bringing up the All Lives Matter movement to justify the Black Lives Matter movement. It's just not substantiated and not like,
I just thought it was interesting how this ties back into the discussion we had earlier about disciplinary action, because I think it's absolutely true that like bringing up someone's past isn't enough to indict them on the spot, right? And I think that sort of factors in, because if someone has a history, and this sort of connects even to, I know this is sort of this might sound like an outlandish connection, but it sort of ties into the idea of cancel culture, right? Like recently, and this has been happening a lot more in the past year, but a lot of people are getting canceled over a history of racist speech or participation in racist causes. And I think it recently happened with like Doja Cat or someone. I think there have been a lot of people involved in this, but I think it sort of ties in because we tread a careful line, and this happens, one with apologists for police brutality, either unintentional or intentional, right? There are people who are white supremacists who try to rationalize the murder of innocent Black men by bringing up, a past history of disorderly conduct or whatever. And there are people who unintentionally contribute to a culture that sort of normalizes police brutality and violence. But irrespective of whether or not it's intentional, it has, the same end result, which is that they're giving authorities a license to indict someone or punish them on the spot simply due to things they've done in the past that have no connection to the actual incident, in question, just by tying in things from the past. And I think that is sort of relevant to that larger discussion about action we need to take if we want to reform people in our society, and if we want to reform our overall outlook on things so that people are more respectful of, marginalized communities, right? Because if someone has a prior history of like racist speech or something, that sort of does, and again, I know this really isn't connected to the incident of George Floyd, but I think it's an important discussion to have based on what someone had said earlier about the retributive justice, because that sort of defines our model for approaching any sort of misconduct, whether it's just speech or whether it's police brutality, right? Like in any case, the justice system, like the larger system in question that dictates how all of this is approached, that, I don't know if that makes sense, but our approach to all of that depends on the answers to questions like these. So that's why we have to be really precise when we're having discussions about this. We have to put our foot down and clarify that it doesn't matter what someone has done in the past, right? No one deserves to have a police officer put their knee on their neck for 9 minutes, right? Like that's not justifiable under any circumstances. That's why we need to be precise, because all those little discussions add up to the larger discussion of how our system should function. I don't know if that was clear enough. Sorry if that was off track.
No, that was very clear. Again, I just wanted to clarify that when I brought that up, I meant that he was not. I'm not saying that his past should justify his the fact that the police officers had stepped on his neck and had killed him. I'm saying that's why that they had stopped him in the first place. But then again, now I was given the information that the police officers didn't know of his past. So now I understand, and I'd like to thank the people that have clarified it for me.
Additionally, I think it's really important to bring up the fact that it's not the police officer's job to say whether or not someone's past actions means that they should die. That's a lawyer's job. It's the legal structure that's supposed to determine the consequences of our actions. Police officers do not know enough about the law to make those kinds of decisions. A lawyer needs to go through 7 or more years of education to figure out what's the proper response to any given action, any accumulation of actions. Police officers are not in the position where they're allowed to do that, or they know how to do that the right way. So any justification of past actions and police brutality, they don't work, because that's not what police are meant to do. that's just not in their job frame. So it cannot be used as an argument.
Yeah.
I do want to thank you though for listening and understanding that when you had information wrong, you allowed yourself to be educated properly about the issue. Because, you know, at the end of the day, that's what I think this is all about. It's about, you know, whenever there's misinformation, we try to come together and correct it. So thank you again for, you know, actually taking the time to listen to what we were saying and
I think
mind about it.
Yeah, I think with that, it's sort of a perfect place to start to close this out. I hope that all of us have taken something from this, have come out of this better, more learned. And with this, we have the knowledge and the ability to help other people, right? There's a select few of us who are in this call and those who are in it and left before. And now we have the opportunity, we have the ability to help other people, right? Like we talked about with the issue with IUSD, or how we talked about the cycle of poverty, or the prison industrial complex, things that a lot of people don't know about. We now have the ability to take it further. And so us here at OC Justice Project, we want to thank you guys for coming. We want to thank you for making this successful and for helping all of us become more educated in this. I know that we want to do more events like this in the future. And I know Wismic, if you just want to give a brief preview for what you're also planning to do.
Yeah, of course. So right now, because of all the things that we just talked about, because of the focus on education and restorative justice that I think all of us care about, I am going to be hosting a protest on the 13th at Irvine City Hall from 1 to 3, in which we're going to focus on that message, education, and helping people learn and change for the better. We're going to be hosting an Instagram Live on Tuesday on my account from around probably 3 to 4. There'll be more information about it on my account afterwards. But generally what I'm trying to do is I'm working with multiple schools, Black student unions. Right now, like Northwood, OSHA, and UNI are the ones that we're talking to. But the goal is to try to get our community together and create a community-wide understanding that education is the way out of this, and to push for legislative agendas as well as social agendas that move towards that ideal.
And yeah, so with that, I want to say thank you again to everybody for coming, and be on the lookout for both Wismic's event in the future and more from OC Justice Project.
Yeah, and we'll definitely include Wismic's event in our email list. If you guys aren't on it, it's on ocjusticeproject.org/contact. We'll be emailing out a lot of stuff, and we're going to have a lot of these events in the future, and we'll be sure to link all of Wismic's information just so we get as many people as possible. Yeah, so thank you guys all for coming. If you have any last minute remarks, feel free to do so. But otherwise, yeah, we'll call it a day. Thank you guys.
Could you put the resource list on could you put the resource list on this chat?
Yeah, I can type it in the chat. Feel free to share this with anyone, and we'll add to it. Continue. Yeah.
Arush, can you just put it on the website?
Yeah, I can just link it on the website. I'll put it as an OC Justice Project. I'll put it in the chat right now, and I'll make a resource page on our website. I was planning on doing that.
You can also put it on the bio of our Instagram.
Yeah, we'll probably put it a bunch of places. So just check social media. We'll have more events. We're probably gonna get local officials and political leaders to join in on one of us, just so we can get a little more local perspective. But yeah, if you guys have any ideas, please feel free to reach out to us, fundraising stuff, and we'd love to hear from all of you. Thank you guys.
Hey Wismic, sorry, do you have an Instagram post for this?
Yeah, 100%. It's on my Instagram page and it's public. Let me see if I can link my Instagram really quickly.
I can also, let me pause sharing for a second. I'll find your Instagram on thing.
Yeah, I have it right here.
Okay.
So my updates about the protest and the Instagram Live thing that I'm going to be doing, working with different schools, BSUs, all of those updates will be coming out firstly through my Instagram, and then later on we're going to develop an Instagram page specifically for the movement and everything.
Yeah. It's on
And the
screen.
resource page is now in the bio for OC Justice Project, so you can check it out there, and you can send it to other people as well.
Thank you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Dude, this Candace Owens video, holy, she just went off. Oh my, oh.
Okay, wait.
You don't watch it?
Wait, what?
Wait. What were you talking about? I didn't hear what you said.
The Candace Owens video that she put in the chat, I just watched the entire thing. I was like,
Can you send it in our OC Justice Project? I didn't get a chance to.
It's in the Zoom. It's in the Zoom chat. Just
Oh, okay, it's in the Zoom chat. Let me full screen this.
yeah.
Good?
Hello, Facebook.
Okay, I'm gonna watch it after.
Yeah, I'll watch it after.
I feel like, screenshot and watch it now. I feel like it's honestly like pretty like.
Should I play it right now?
Yeah.
Hello,
Okay,
Facebook family.
what
I
Wait,
have
she's-
decided
she's
to do
doing
this
it
video.
right,
It
I'm
has
guessing,
been
right?
rolling
If you
very
just look at
heavily
the
on
title.
my heart.
Wait, it's not like letting me screenshot right now. I don't know why.
We can all just watch it after.
Yeah.